All right, my friend. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me out here and have this kind of a conversation. I feel this is something that's going to set the tone for somebody and help them go from living a journey of being a victim to moving into the hero's adventure kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Mike. I really do appreciate that.
These conversations are fun, they're amazing, and I really enjoy just getting together with somebody and just kind of throwing ideas around.
Oh, absolutely. And I love the relaxed style you have going on here. If people can't see right now, the setting that you're in, that alone is just making me feel so comfortable. So, yeah, really good choice of location there, Mike.
I appreciate that. So let's go ahead and get right into it and talk to me a little bit about your background. What brought you to where you're at today?
Sure. So I've gone through a lot in my life, and well, I don't want to just give like a laundry list of all the horrible things that have happened, but I guess just to kind of bring people up to speed who don't know anything about me, I'm a two-time cancer survivor. I was brought up in a Jehovah's Witness household that taught me that how I identified was absolutely wrong and that I would be destroyed in the Great Tribulation or Armageddon, as sometimes it's referred to, which really just shaked me to my core as a young child in my formative years. And when I got cancer, I thought it was a punishment from God. And I started to just isolate myself and formulate this thought process about who I was and started to hate myself. And so I started to dabble, not just dabble, I started to really engage in drugs and alcohol to the point where I was getting in a lot of trouble, making a lot of stupid mistakes. And paying the price for my actions, my choices. That culminated in me going to prison, and I went to prison for 14 months. I was sentenced for 16. I got out 2 months early for good behavior. And there's a few other things that have happened in my life as well, but I my point here is everything that I've gone through, a huge portion of me grappling with the trauma in my life is going back to falling in love with who I am and being okay with who I am. And a big part of being able to do that is what I've learned is called mindfulness. And the outdoors are a huge part of helping us become mindful. So even for people out there that are like, oh, what is this wishy-washy thing called mindfulness and why are we talking about it? You don't need to become like a subject matter expert. I'm not. You don't even need to believe in it. All you need to know is that by being outdoors, there's plenty of science to back this. By the way, I'm an IO psychologist, so that just means that's a fancy word for saying that I went and got a doctorate in business psychology. We could talk more about what that means, but the point is that I engage in reading research. And what I've found more profound than anything is all the research that points to what you do naturally going outside. And all the health benefits that take place. Now, look, it's not going to wipe out everything in your life. It's not going to bring you to a place where everything's at 100% and all of a sudden now you're this happy-go-lucky person, but it makes a difference. And so when I saw the description for your podcast show, I just lit up because whether people realize it or not, being outdoors, having that adventure outdoors is a huge key component to dealing with trauma, to falling in love with yourself, although it doesn't feel that way because you're falling in love with the outdoors, but you're actually learning more about yourself, something that I know you know, because you're engaging in all sorts of activities that are helping you understand and take all the noise and just focus on the moment at hand. And nature does that automatically. It's very hard to do when you're not in nature, but that's what doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists want us to do in order to help us get past these past traumas.
I love how open you were with setting the stage for that. There was something in there that I kind of disagree with a little bit, and that's where you touched on the mindfulness and you don't have to believe.
Sure.
And the reason that I say that is because throughout my journey of healing and the studying and the research that I've done, belief is a huge part of it.
Mm,
People can come to a doctor, a healer, or anything like that, but there is an unspoken agreement that you got to believe in the acts and the things that these people are giving you or helping you with in order for them to truly work. I remember actually laying on the psychiatrist's couch and being told at the end of it that you got every form of depression there is, man. The outcome isn't good for you, but I think I can help you.
mm,
And that was it. It was very cut and dry. And for years I struggled with that. I made no progress at all until finally I tapped into the idea of believing that I could come to terms with it. I
mm,
could make friends with myself. I could fall in love with myself, to steal your own words.
yeah.
And that was based off of this idea of befriending our feelings
Mm,
and befriending my emotions, almost putting a human face on.
mm. Yeah, Mike, I think you hit on something really important. So thank you. And feel free to push back as much as you'd like, because I think that's what makes a good conversation. We don't need to be on the same page as with everything. That's what makes the world so beautiful. So a couple of things about that. Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think having a belief, whether it's in a higher power or yourself or in someone else that can assist you, is extremely important. In fact, it can then become a key ingredient to forging or facilitating a way for you to change and do something that's better. I would also like to add something that I learned from acting, because my undergraduate degree, if you could believe this, is in acting. I don't know why. Like my parents were like, please don't do that. And I went ahead and did it anyway. And here I am, right? Like I had to get other degrees in my mind anyway, because I'm not advocating that everybody has to go out and get degrees. There are many different ways to make a living, especially nowadays. But from my trajectory, I was like, I have this nonsensical sort of undergraduate degree in acting. Forgive me, anyone out there listening that's like, I have that kind of degree too. How dare you say that? But that's just my perspective. And then I went and I had to keep training myself until I found my, where I belonged. My point is that when I started learning about acting, they said there was two ways because anyone who knows something about acting understands that it's not about faking it. It's about truly believing in the moment. If you don't believe in those circumstances, you are doing a disservice to your art because you are not going to create a very realistic sort of circumstance. And people are going to pick up on that right away and say, oh, this is horrible. I'm not going to watch it, etc. So it behooves us as artists to make sure that we're truly believing in the moment. That I learned something because the reality is we don't always go into a situation believing 100%. We have, as we should, all sorts of thoughts and ideas and questions, and we're not totally on board. And sometimes, not all the time, sometimes it helps just to start doing the action before you actually believe it. And then the belief starts to come. And I want to reiterate, this doesn't work all the time because it's sort of like a backwards way to do it. The best way to do things is to have this belief, as you mentioned, because then it's very helpful because doorways start to open. You start to see things. And actually, there's science behind it to where you actually get to see more in your peripheral vision when you believe. You're opening up, literally. So that's the best way to go about doing it. But I would also say there's another way for those who are struggling, who are finding it really hard to believe. Go ahead and start the actions, and sometimes the belief will start to flow. And I learned that through acting, and I tried it because there are situations where obviously you get put in acting where you're like, I would never do this. What are you, crazy? No, but you start to do the actions and then you do start to believe it. So anyway, not right or wrong. I love these two coming together simultaneously as tools in a toolkit for those who might be struggling, as I mentioned.
See, I really appreciate the way that you spun that because as you're talking and I'm listening, I'm thinking, it's almost hunting season. And a lot, one of the very fundamental aspects in order to go out and hunt is you have to go through hunter's education.
Hmm.
You have to take a test, get certified that you've at least got the basics of keeping yourself safe and all those important aspects of hunting. And when I think about somebody that walks into the hunting class for the first time, based off of the idea that I want to go out and I want to experience these things, I want to put something on the table with my own two hands.
Hmm.
They don't necessarily know how to bridge the gap from sitting in class to successfully filling a tag.
Hmm.
They're actually walking out on opening day based off of the belief.
Hmm.
They put that system in their mind and into action. And getting out there, they know that there's one fundamental tool that's going to help them to achieve their goal: observation.
Hmm.
And as you observe more and more, you start to understand the way that things truly flow and the way that they work without that story that you put in your head, because let's be honest, 9 times out of 10, you go out there and try on your first hunt. You're like driving to the spot to park, going, I'm going to nail this. This day is just going to be successful. And ultimately, most of the time, it doesn't go your way.
Hmm.
But if you hold on to that belief system, you're going to get back out there
Hmm.
and you're going to take the knowledge that you picked up on from that day. And the more you try, the more it's going to become successful.
Absolutely. And that same process can be applied to so many different things in life. You go back to that belief system, that's your foundation. And if it's unshakable, and that can take some time, especially for certain people like myself, who has spent a good portion of their life denying themselves or just not engaging in situations because we're afraid to fail because we've thought of ourselves as failures for the majority of our life. And some people might be like, "Oh, boo-hoo, get over it and move on." You know, some of that is valid. Like sometimes you just need to start the action, but a lot of times it's about you need to start with the belief. So I'm right there with you. I love different strategies because not one thing works for everyone, right? It's like we need more than one thing so that when the first thing doesn't work, we at least have something to fall back on. And that's also an acting thing as well, and a producing thing in the motion picture industry, not to get too involved in a separate sort of industry, but always have a plan B, plan C, plan D, and surround yourself with people who can help you be successful. Those ingredients are the same regardless of what you're trying to do. And I think that's really important. So thank you for bringing it up.
Most definitely. As I'm thinking through this in my head, and I'm picturing myself at the beginning of my mindfulness journey,
Hmm.
bringing that into my life. The more experience that I gain walking that road, the more I realize that the past is so important. Even though for a lot of us, we sit in those shoes where we hate ourselves
Hmm.
based off of where we've been, the decisions that we've made. But coming to terms with the shame of that, it removes the veil and you're able to see that, where I'm at now and where I want to go, all the game plans that I put together to get myself there are built within the footsteps that I've already walked because it's taught me something.
Wow, what a profound thing to keep in mind for all people, regardless of where you're at. I think shame and blame are two huge facets of why we get stuck so often. Now, look, there are certain things out there that human beings do that they ought not be doing, but you better believe that when they're doing it, regardless of how we feel from the outside, that they have justified it in a certain way. And there are certain atrocities that take place that human beings engage in that should not have any excuses whatsoever. But I don't think that's what our conversation is really surrounding about, because those are like in the fringes and the extremes of human behavior. But for the most part, what happens in between all of that are things that we've imposed upon ourselves, whether it be socially or otherwise, that we have labeled ourselves as, oh, this is horrible. And I'll give you an example. I work right now for a nonprofit in the financial education space, and I find a lot of practitioners, especially historically speaking, who talk about minorities who spend $30 of their budget, which they need for food, but instead utilize that money for something like the lottery. And from a purely objective point of view, although I argue that it is purely objective, people say things like, well, they just need more education. Look at what they're doing. They're spending their money in a way that's just not right. Um, Now, what's going on with that picture if you really dig deep? It's like, yeah, of course they should not be spending that money, but do you think they don't know that? I mean, see, when you start to dig deeper into the reasoning behind why somebody is operating a certain way, then you begin to understand something. They're actually tapping into a dream. They're actually tapping into hope and opportunity. And that's what means something to them because otherwise they're not getting that in other areas. So then the conversation can change and we can say, okay, what are some ways that we can assist people in those situations to see the value of tapping into their dreams and their hopes in ways that don't take away from food on their table. So it's not labeling, and we do this to ourselves all the time. It's easier to talk about it with external individuals because it's easier to see, but we do this all the time to ourselves. We're lying to ourselves and saying that, oh, this is horrible, whatever. Reframing that is so, so important because it becomes the beginning of understanding what's underneath that. You can't do that if you're denying the whole thing and labeling it as something negative, something wrong with you. But once you're able to see and dig deep, then you could start to say, wait, what are my options? Because I'm only going to one option right now, playing the lottery. But there are a million other things that I could be doing to tap into that hope and that dream. Going outdoors is one of them, believe it or not. There's so many great things about just being outdoors and being with nature that you start to dream and hope as an automatic thing. Your brain will start to just react differently. I advocate so much for that, although I'm sitting inside right now. And but every chance I get, I live in Denver, Colorado. And anyone that knows about Denver and Colorado, generally speaking, knows that this is a place for being outdoors. And I came from South Florida previous to this, which isn't horrible for being outdoors, but the differences are like night and day. So anyway, I really appreciate being in a place where I can be outdoors. And back to, looking at myself, all the times that I thought of myself as being a bad person, um, or that I was making decisions that were horrible, making that change, that mind shift, has opened up the doorway for me tapping into all sorts of things that have helped me flourish. And that doesn't mean that I'm a perfect person. I'm not sitting here trying to pretend that. I still have my ups and downs, but I got to tell you, it is nothing like when I was abusing drugs and alcohol.
Stepping outside of that example that you gave of the person that is chasing a dream based off a lottery ticket,
Hmm.
there's something that I can add to that. In the idea that we're all chasing a dream,
Hmm.
but where we are in the moment, we're utilizing the vocabulary that we have
Hmm.
in that moment. So we're trying to figure out all these different steps and all these different things in real time because change is inevitable and there's no way around that or the progression of life and responsibility. So I think as my mindful journey has expanded, it's given me this ability to give myself grace
Hmm.
for the imperfections that I've made along the way. Instead of beating myself up with to tap into that example, spending $3 on a lottery ticket that
Hmm.
I know I should be buying something else with and it doesn't win, doesn't bring me any money.
Hmm.
I would get angry, I would get frustrated.
Hmm.
However, when I realized that, this is one of the seeds that build toward my dream, and it's the only one that I really know of in the moment, I can rationalize that.
Mm.
I can understand it. And then if I really want to dig deeper, I can start putting bullet points on a piece of paper to realize that I can trace a different path. I
Mm.
can change the narrative if I look at the cause and effect of the vocabulary that I'm using.
Oh, for sure. The words we tell ourselves are so, so important. I appreciate you bringing that up. We could change our language, we could change our actions, we could change our beliefs. I mean, we've covered so far like three major components of human change and betterment, which I think is great. Um, you had mentioned at the outset something, and then I kind of lost it a bit, but I'll try to see if it comes back to me. So yeah, I had a flurry of like thoughts that came to me that I thought you because you said so many great things just then. But anyway, le- oh, I was going to say like I have been so angry at myself for so many things in the past, and it has done nothing to help me move forward. However, psychology has been very helpful for me to understand that I don't want to deny myself the ability to process negative emotions, but that's different than living there. And so, what that has done for me is give myself this ability to be okay with being negative about myself. So, oh, stupid mistake. You shouldn't have done that. But then after you process that, let it go and learn from it. That's the most important part. Because I think, especially in like Western civilizations, we're taught from a very young age, especially those who are more traditional style, that emotions are not to be like processed. We don't say it in those words, but we're brought up as, and I'm speaking for myself, I don't want to speak for anyone else, to where being a man meant that I should not be processing emotions outwardly. That if I had an emotion, that I needed to just control that as well as possible, especially in the workplace. Um, and that if it was a negative emotion, I just need to be on top of that and control and not allowing other people to see that. Well, psychology has helped me to show the wrong in that. And I'm not saying that I should be going around like crying and yelling and screaming in front of everybody. It's not about that. But it's about the everyday emotions that we feel, like feeling like we did a stupid mistake or being angry about a change that has taken place or something that our partner did. It's okay to feel that way. Again, where's the learning lesson? How do we get better from it? And let's not stay there too long. And that's the part that's different for everyone. For some people, you need to process that for maybe a few hours. For some other people, that might be a few days. And I think being okay with that, going back to what we had talked about before, the differences that exist, just because it takes me 3 hours to get over something and it takes somebody else 3 days, hey, that's okay. I accept that. I should be able to accept that. And that's what's so wonderful about programs like what you've put together here. You're bringing together conversations and perspectives that are not always going to align together. There's different ways of looking at stuff. There's different ways of solving for things. And it's all relevant.
That's one thing that I've definitely enjoyed about my work is the fact that I have my practices, my rituals, routines, and my thought process that I've developed off of experience as well as study.
Mm.
But then I can sit down at a table and have a conversation with somebody who's coming from a completely different perspective.
Mm.
And we both walk away with aha moments.
Yeah.
It's funny because a few months back, I sat down at this conversation. It was a roundtable thing that in reality, I think they thought I had no place sitting at
Mm.
because I do everything very differently, very outdoorsy, and put a philosophical, bow on top of it. They do everything very formal through the book, and it's just the simple black and white.
Mm.
And one of the people at the conversation, they suffered for years with bipolarism.
Mm.
Now, what they were taught clinically was to sit down and be quiet, to mute those traits.
Mm.
And then as we engaged in the conversation, and I started asking questions about how that benefits them. They had no answer.
Hmm.
It was just simply this is what I was taught through a black and white spectrum.
Hmm.
But then when you add the color on top of that, just like as I mentioned about my diagnosis and experience with depression,
Hmm.
you can sit silently, but you're not going to gain anything.
Hmm.
When you add color to the conversation, that's where these new ideas flow. And namely, the example that I presented to him was learning to embrace all these different things that you currently look at as a struggle.
Hmm.
They add character. They are who you are. You throw logs on a fire, and over time, that medium is going to connect with oxygen.
Hmm.
That flame is going to start to consume it and start to grow taller and higher, and it's going to become more vibrant and more colorful. If we would do the same within our own journeys and remove the black and white label,
Hmm.
realize that there's a lot of things that don't necessarily apply to each individual.
Hmm.
I feel like it would remove, as we talked about in the very beginning, that shame, that stigma, and that would allow people a better arena to be able to develop who they are inside.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome. Mike, I love how you put it with the fire and everything. And it reminds me again of something that I learned early on in acting. I try to apply as much as I learn, even if it seems like a totally different industry, to as many different things as possible. This sort of like synergistic thinking, as I call it. And the reason why is because there's so many learning lessons. I don't have to reinvent the wheel. I can learn from you. I can learn from this other person. There are tidbits like what you're talking about. We get to pick and choose the things that are going to work best for us because we know ourselves better than anybody else. It's not about emulating or trying to match what somebody else has done tit for tat, where you went through step 1 through 7 and I have to go through 1 through 7 in order to get where you're at. No, no. It's like maybe just step number 2 from you and then step number 7 from Joe over here is going to work best for me. And I'll never forget the words. I had a really good acting teacher that said to us, there are many, many, many different ways to go about acting, many different models. You're going to learn them all. That's what you're here for. But you're not to try to do them all. Your job is to pick and choose the things that resonate best with you for your life and your art so that you create your own model. And I loved it. I was like, whoa. It like hit all these lights inside my head where I was like, that's how I want to approach life. And I love it because just look at religion as an example. And I don't want to get like, too much into religiosity, but there's good and bad with religion all across the board. And for me, one of the things I had to do was square away, like, how do I want to deal with this? Because I learned in psychology that you need religion, religiosity, or spirituality in your life, period. You can get that by being outside. That could be your spiritual nature. Like you're close to nature and that's how you figure it out. But the point is, according to the research, you need something. And so I started to think, what is that something going to be for me? And I started to look and pick and choose all these things that I loved about religion and the things that I don't like, the things that don't align with my values and how I feel, I've pushed them to the side. And that's not to say that they're horrible things for everybody. So I get the fact that like my parents brought me up as Jehovah's Witness, as I mentioned before. I don't blame them for that. They had every good intention in their heart when they aligned themselves with this religion and they decided to say, we want to bring up our boys to do the same. I don't blame them for that. But the very thing that was a potion for them that brought all of this beauty was not the same thing for me. But I was able to look at it in hindsight and say, there are elements of that are going to benefit me. And I think that applies to every single conversation we have with people. And we need that here in America more than ever. Because what we are concentrated on above and beyond everything else are the differences that separate us. And what that is doing is isolating us. it is creating more animosity towards each other, as you know, and it is not doing us any good. Instead, this is not about like, oh, I accept everything from everyone. Again, I go back to the religion thing. I can still say I don't align with those things, but I can still see the value in all those other things. You need both. And we all need to have those conversations more often, as far as I feel, because you and everyone that looks like you, Mike, deserves to have everything and to be respected as much as anybody else in the world. We can't do that if we don't know each other and know how we tick. So sorry I get a little like riled up about it, but I feel very passionately about this.
Passion is good though. And I feel like within that, there's such a framework for one of the most sobering points that anybody can point out to another individual,
Hmm.
which is no matter where you go in life, no matter how many distractions that you put in front of your face, you're going to be there
That's right.
when you get to the end. So
Absolutely.
when that person that you're looking at in the mirror is always the person that's going to be there within that framework, it gives you an opportunity to really explore, understand, get to know, fall in love with, and befriend that person that's looking in the mirror.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's understandable that people avoid that. I'm not saying that it's good, but it's understandable. And the reason why is because we've been hurt. There are things that have happened in our life that make us want to avoid situations, people, places, things. You know, it is a natural sort of reaction, a human reaction. Unfortunately, that natural reaction that takes place takes us further away from where we need to be because it's isolating us. It is causing us to avoid situations and people that are actually going to help us not only fall in love with ourselves, but also fall in love with the world and fall in love with people again. But again, it makes sense that we're avoiding, especially if you've been traumatized in your life and the trauma has stemmed from other people, which is usually the case. That as a natural consequence of that, you just start to avoid people because people suck. Right?
Well,
But it
not only
doesn't
do
have to be
people
that way.
not only do people suck overall, but there's that one thing that we're taught from a very young age: pick
Hmm.
up the distractions.
Uh,
The distractions are a lot easier.
yeah, yeah.
So as we start to transition and wind this down, I want you to speak to somebody that has just realized that they can set the distractions down
Yeah.
and go on this quest to not only discover but fall in love with who they are. What are the first steps?
Yeah, what a great question. So, first, I'd like to acknowledge that it's not easy in this day and age. For some people, it is, but for a lot of people, it's not. And the reason being is that technology is created to keep us tied to that technology. It is purposefully built that way. And I know this for a fact because there's something called in psychology UX design, which is the user experience. And psychologists are purposefully put on to these companies, these tech companies, and their task is really to increase the amount of time that people spend on apps, on phones, etc. That is their job. And that's the reason why they're getting paid. And so when you realize that you have entire industries that are hell bent on keeping you tied to their technology, it's a wake up call because they have a vested interest in doing that to keep their bottom line moving forward. We have a vested interest in minimizing that as much as possible so that we can not, I wouldn't say remove. Some people can remove, but I'd say minimize as much as humanly possible those distractions because they're not doing us any good. They're not moving us forward. They're not helping us flourish. Guess what is probably one of the best ways to reduce, minimize all those distractions?
Well,
Going
it's
outdoors.
I was gonna say that that's a simple question right there. Just get
Yeah,
outside.
yeah. When I'm on a hike, I'm not on my phone. I might pull it out to take a picture. Yeah, maybe. But there's no picture that is going to do better than what I can see with my own eyes. And the more you are outdoors, the more you realize none of it has anything to do with technology. In fact, I love going to the places here in Colorado where your phone doesn't work because then you can't pull it out. There's no point. You force yourself to remain in the moment. That's also an acting thing. The best acting takes place in the moment. And so I know I keep going back between like the outdoors and acting. It's not just those two things, though. There are many, many different things that help us to remove the distractions in life. But in order for that to start, you either need a belief, right, Mike, that
Absolutely.
this is something that you actually feel in your heart that is going to help you, and I would add to that, if you're kind of on the fence and you're like, I'm not sure if I believe, just start the action and the belief will come.
I think that's very well said and a fitting end for this conversation. But before I let you go today, you got to let people know how to get in touch with you, work with you, all them good things.
Sure, yeah. I dislike to plug myself. I'd rather have the conversation, but I get this is a part of it. So, Joshua Caraballo, you could reach me on my website, which is drjosh.solutions. That's in place of a .com or .org. Also, Dr. Josh Solutions, if I could say it, on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, which is now X. And also, if you want to learn more, you could read my book, but I'm not trying to make a bunch of sales. If for any reason you feel like you don't want to spend the 17.99 for the book, it's a little less, it's like 9.99 for an ebook, reach out to me and I will get you a copy for free. Because I think if we truly want our stories out there, it's not about you having to pay for it. It's about us providing those stories so that you can see how some people have made it through the muck in life, if you will, and you shouldn't have to pay for that.
I think that's amazing. That is one of those ideas that not a lot of people truly embrace in our society. It's all about what can I get out of
Hmm.
what I've done, or what can I get you to give me if I throw some big buzzwords at you. And that's something that has been a mission behind this project of like a sub statement is emphasizing the fact that when you reach out and you find authenticity,
Hmm.
you find somebody that truly aligns with you. It's not about the buzzwords.
Mhm.
It's not about the empty promises or how much money you can throw at somebody.
Hmm.
It's about what's truly going to motivate and move the needle along for you. So thank you very much for this conversation. I feel like we had so many other side points that we could definitely run for hours, and we're going to have to get together again down the road and chase some of those points. But thank you very much. This has been a pleasure.
Oh, absolutely, Mike. Definitely a pleasure and an honor. Thank you for inviting me and for having this show. I really do truly appreciate it.
Absolutely. So until we meet again, I don't believe in the words goodbye. So whether it's in this life or the next, I wish you a safe and prosperous journey.
Ah, likewise. Thank you again.